Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York, luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve, and the B.L. Manger Foundation.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת שחים גם יוחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת שחים גם יוחד.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. I once heard Rabbi Reuven Leichter, the great Musar rabbi, say that when two opposite, seemingly incompatible ideas become one, that is Kedusha. That is when we achieve holiness. Jewish life is filled with moments we are asked to fully hold two ideas or two emotions that are in contention, that are incompatible, and there is no place on the Jewish calendar which more dramatically embodies this than the 48 hours of Yom Hazikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut. Yom Hazikaron, Israel's Memorial Day, is a deeply emotional day dedicated to remembering the soldiers who gave their lives defending the state of Israel, as well as those who have been victims of terror. It is a solemn, reflective time marked by moments of nationwide silence, uniting us in grief and gratitude. Yet as the sun sets on Yom Hazikaron, we welcome Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, celebrating the miracle of Israel's creation, symbolizing the triumph and resilience and the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream. This transition from mourning to celebration asks us to hold the grief over the sacrifices made for the country's existence alongside the profound joy of its independence. And certainly since October 7th, that challenge has taken on new meaning. In honor of Yom Hazikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut, we're privileged to speak with Dr. Daniel Gordis, renowned author, thinker, and Koret Distinguished Fellow at Shalem College, the private liberal arts college in Jerusalem. Dr. Gordis' work has profoundly shaped our understanding of Israel's history, identity, and challenges, including through his many books. Books like Israel, A Concise History of a Nation Reborn, Saving Israel, How the Jewish People Can Win a War That May Never End, and most recently, Impossible Takes Longer, 75 years after its creation, has Israel fulfilled its founders' dreams. Dr. Gordis has been publishing a Substack called Israel from the Inside since 2021, with the goal of understanding, in his words, the soul of Israel. As we reflect on Israel's sacrifices and celebrate its achievements, we'll explore the legacy of Israel's founding vision and what the future holds. Dr. Gordis, thank you for joining us.
Great pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I know you've been on JBS several times, and my predecessor, Rabbi Mark Golub, may his memory be a blessing, had plenty of opportunities to chat with you. But for those either new to you or haven't seen you on this show, say a little bit about who you are so they know who we're talking with today.
Grew up in America to a Zionist family, I guess you'd call them a conservative, big C, conservative Zionist family. Grew up mostly in Baltimore, with the exception of 2 years between the ages of 10 and 12 when I was actually in Israel. My parents came for a couple of years. Went to Columbia, very different university back then. Did rabbinical school at JTS. And did a PhD at USC, by which point my wife and I were already living in LA. I worked at a shul for a while. Then I was at the University of Judaism, which later became the American Jewish University. And we came to Israel ostensibly for 1 year in 1998 on sabbatical.
Okay.
And about a couple of months in, my wife and I were both literally sitting at home. It was a short day in Israel, short school day. I was reading, I remember what book I was still reading. I still remember what book I was reading. And she's reading over there. And she just looks up, she goes, "You know I'm not going back, right?" And I said, "Okay, the day's short, the kids are coming from school. I want to finish this book." I said, "Yeah, that's fine." And a few minutes later, she goes, "I'm not going back. You know that, right?" I said, "Yeah, fine." A few minutes later, she goes, "And if you go back, I think you're going to miss the kids," which was when I understood the woman wants to have a serious conversation.
Sure.
So we put down our books, and she wanted to make Aliyah. And we had done a bunch of things geographically for my career. It was really her turn. It was a very different Israel. It was 1998, full of promise. There was this guy named Ehud Barak who beat this guy called Bibi Netanyahu, and Barak promised peace with the Syrians and the Palestinians and getting the boys out of Lebanon. I mean, it's a kind of time that we can't even imagine anymore. And we made Aliyah. We stayed. Went back to sell the house, but we stayed. And we had an extraordinary experience. We had 3 kids, 12, 9, and 5. They all grew up in Israel. They all went to the army. They're all married. They all, thank God, have kids. That's the story.
Wow. All right, so let's stick with that for a few minutes, this kind of transition from America to Israel. And I know you've also written extensively from Israel about Americans in America. Tell me a little bit just now, I know before we even get to October 7th, looking back, the decision to stay, what that impact has been like, how that's changed the trajectory of your life.
Well, obviously it changes the trajectory of your life in a lot of ways. As a parent, you have different worries. So if it's important to you, in America that your children marry Jewish people, then you have an uphill battle that you can't always control. In Israel, that's not terribly much of a concern, but you have the concern, especially with boys who go into the army, who are very much in harm's way. But I would say is that what we felt was we were part of an extraordinary chapter in the history of the Jewish people, that it was a privilege to be part of that chapter, that we were living a better life. A smaller house, for most of the time we had one car instead of two cars, but who really cares? The one thing that we really felt we had, quote unquote, taken away from our children was the opportunity to get a real liberal arts education. I went to Columbia, my wife went to Brandeis, and we both really thrived on that kind of education, which is why in the end I ended up being part of a group of people that founded Israel's first liberal arts college called Shalem College, which now you could really get the kind of liberal arts education that I got, but when our kids were growing up, you couldn't. But they did fine. I mean, they went to law school in Israel, and they did great. So I really think we had a great life. We had an amazing community. We still have an amazing community of friends. Our kids grew up believing in something bigger than themselves. When I was 18, I went to college. When I was finished with college, I went to graduate school because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I went to graduate school again. And nobody ever said to me growing up as a kid in America, well, when are you giving back to something that's bigger than you? And had they said that, I would have said, what? I wasn't going to join the American Army. I didn't know anybody out after the Vietnam era who was in the Army, basically. Our kids all went to the Army, and they never questioned it. They grew up in an amazing country that gave them security, that gave them cultural richness, that gave them free health care, that gave them a Jewish environment, and the country asked them to pay back. And they did. And one of my kids just did a regular Army service. My daughter, because women serve 2 years, did 3. My son did not 3, but 8 as a commando. They felt very, very deeply connected and committed to it. And I felt that as a parent was a great gift that the country had given us as parents through our kids.
Beautiful. And I remember, talking on American Jewry for a moment, because now you're there and we're here. And I remember there was an article during Judicial Forum that you with Mati Friedman and Yossi Klein Halevi wrote, kind of saying, like, Americans, where are you? Get involved. We need you to roll up your sleeves and do more. Let's talk about even before October 7th. Like, how do you think about American Jewry? I know from where you're sitting.
Well, I wrote a book shortly before the judicial reform stuff called We Stand Divided, and was really looking at the two very different ways in which American Jews and Israeli Jews think about history, think about peoplehood, think about all sorts of things. I think the book came out too early. I think, frankly, if the book came out now, it would get a lot more attention. It didn't get the attention that I thought it would get or hoped that it would get when it came out. The New York Times panned it because it didn't spend enough time talking about the occupation. The book wasn't about the occupation.
Sure.
So, but there's certain worldviews in which
Yes.
the only legitimate subject is occupation. So look, I think American Jews and Israeli Jews are very different animals. And I think that part of the problem in this relationship is that we have never been willing to actually talk about how different we are. When a couple goes for therapy or a couple's working stuff through, the first thing you got to do is drop the pretense and talk about what's really paining me, what's really paining you, what are we doing together well, what are we doing together not well. And American Jews, I think, and Israelis had focused on telling this rah-rah story about Israel, which Israelis knew was a simplification to the point of almost falsehood, but not quite. It left any American Jews who were more conflicted about a more nuanced story feeling ostracized, and so they went off and created all kinds of other movements and organizations down the road, some of which I can understand, many of which I don't agree with, which is totally fine. And I think we're now at a point where we have an opportunity and an obligation to begin to talk about how radically different our experiences are right now. And as you mentioned, I put out this blog and podcast called Israel from the Inside. And people write the most lovely things, and also write some not lovely things, but that's okay. But people write, I want you to know we're 100% in this with you. And they mean it with every fiber of their being. Yeah, but your kid's not in Lebanon. And my kid is in Lebanon. And his kids are scared. And his wife is scared. And we're scared. And no, you're not really in it with us in this. Nothing you can do about it. I'm not blaming you for anything. But I think the level of loss in Israel over the course of these last year and a half-ish has highlighted that these are radically different experiences. And the whole, the campus situation in America is a very uncomfortable place for American Jewish kids. And a lot of American Jewish kids have been doing extraordinary things to fight the fight and to hold their heads high and to hold universities accountable. And I give them tremendous credit. But when people say to me, yeah, we got warriors on both sides, it's not the same on the University of, Columbia University campus as it is in Jabalia. It's just not the same. And that's nobody's fault.
Sure.
So I think we have a lot of work to do as two different parts of the community to begin to understand what ways we are similar, what ways we're dissimilar. We won't probably get to it in this setting, but one could have a very interesting conversation. Should there be an American Jewish draft to Tzahal, to the IDF?
Well,
Right? Maybe yes. If you want to be able to write me that email and say, we're in this with you totally, maybe American Jews should say, every year we're going to send 30,000 kids to go join the Israeli army. We can't force anybody, but we're going to create an ethos among American Jews that, if we really call it the national homeland of the Jewish people, and the national homeland of the Jewish people is under attack from 7 different conflicts right now, maybe we should send 30,000 kids for a year or 2 years to actually go fight. That would make a very, very, very different kind of relationship. It's not in the cards right now, but I think it's a fascinating conversation to have, and maybe we'll do that one day.
God. And let me ask one more question on that point, which is, I think I was taught at a young age that, because American Jews are not on the front lines and not only just in the army, but also like doing the work of building the state on the ground, that it's really the role of American Jews to support Israel, but the idea of American Jews pontificating on what should be happening in Israel politically or putting pressure on the American government to put pressure on Israel in some way felt like out of bounds, that we shouldn't be having that seat at the table. Do you agree with that? Where do you stand on that?
I think it's more complex. In other words, I don't think Israelis have a right to say to American Jews, keep sending us your money, but not your opinions. I think that's first of all, that's just not realistic. No relationship works that way. Number two, some of the great things that have happened in Israeli life have happened as a result of American cultural richness. I mean, whatever liturgical and worship creativity there is in Israel, and there's a lot these days, came through the cutting-edge conversations that were happening in Orthodoxy in America, the partnership minions and all that kind of stuff, which eventually made their way to Israel. Feminism in Israel, where there's now Orthodox women rabbis in Israel. Some people listening are in favor, some people listening and watching are not in favor, but there are Orthodox women rabbis in Israel. That's an import from America. In other words, so if you want a real relationship, you're going to get some things that you like and some things that you don't. So I'm not one of those people who says, send your money and don't give me your opinion. But here's what I would say. If you're on the left in America and you're about to pontificate about X, Y, or Z, pontificate's not fair. You're about to speak in a certain way about a certain issue. Ask yourself, why are no Israeli liberals calling for an end to the war? In other words, I'm not talking about now, but in October, November, December of 2023, there were no Israelis on the left calling for an end to the war. Right. And I wanted to say to all these American rabbis who were getting up in front of their congregations, this war has got to end. Why is it that no Israeli liberals are saying that? Are you more genuinely liberal than they are? Are you an authentic progressive and Israelis are not really authentic? Did you ever stop and think, why are they all... First of all, part of the reason they're not talking about it is because they're in the cockpits and in the tanks.
Right.
They don't have a lot of time. But I think that there's a certain kind of hubris that we have a kind of enlightened moral code that we're going to share with our Israelis brothers and sisters. And I think that's what Israelis find annoying. You can have whatever opinion you want, but if you're on the left and you're a progressive, okay, it's not where I am personally, but that's okay. But at least ask yourself why the Israeli left and the Israeli progressives, of whom there are many, are not saying what you're saying, and then are you going to actually let that filter in? That hasn't happened a lot.
Let's focus now. I want to spend a few minutes. I want to talk about the Yoms. I want to start with Yom Hazikaron first, and then we'll talk about that transition. So Yom Hazikaron is approaching. Just talk to me a little bit, on a national level, but also on a personal level. What are you bringing into Yom Hazikaron this year, and what are you thinking about as you approach that day?
I was on Har Herzl last year on Yom Hazikaron. Not because I went to, everybody goes to military cemeteries. By the way, this will just tell you something about what we as American Jews don't really get. So Yom HaZikaron businesses are closed. Mm-hmm. Schools are closed, offices are closed, whatever. And I remember I was working back then at the Mandel Foundation, shortly after we'd made Aliyah. This is probably 1999, 2000, and a bunch of us were trying to find a time to meet. And our schedules were so full, and everybody had said we couldn't find any time. And I said, thinking that I was very creative, well, it's not a Yom Tov, Yom HaZikaron. You're allowed to meet. Maybe we grab some time during the day and we meet. It's completely ridiculous, but I didn't understand that then.
Memorial Day barbecue.
Yeah, it was not a barbecue. It was just going to be a meeting. And a woman, I remember exactly who it was, she said, "You understand that you're the only person who would be at that meeting who doesn't have to be at a cemetery that day." And I remember feeling so small and so inadequate and so stupid. So over the years, thank God, in our immediate familial circle, we don't have to be at a cemetery on Yom HaZikaron. Last year I went because a very skilled friend of mine was actually leading in the afternoon a tour of Yom HaZikaron. Because Har Herzl has an amazing story to it. There's different parts of the mountain and they tell different stories and each war has its area. And he's an amazing guide and teacher. And he said, "I'm taking some people, do you want to come?" And so I went. And by the afternoon of Yom HaZikaron, Har Herzl's pretty empty. It's thousands and thousands of people in every military cemetery in the morning. Parking is a zoo, and whatever, same at Har Herzl. But this was already like 3, 4 in the afternoon. It was getting cooler. And he's leading us around. And you see the part where, the people who died during the resistance before there was a state. Mm-hmm. And you go to the memorial for the Dakar, which was the Israeli submarine that sank in the 1960s and was eventually found. And there's the War of Independence, there's a 56 war, and there's a 67 war, and there's a 73 war, and there's the Lebanon war, and then there's the second Lebanon war, all these areas, whatever, and it's quiet. You see a few groups of teenagers with their yeshiva teachers teaching them, but the mountain's pretty quiet. And then you turn and you come to the 2023. All the graves have October 7th, October 8th, October 9th, October 10th. And there are hundreds of people lying on the stones, sobbing uncontrollably. Young women, clearly 22, 23. It's the boyfriend, it's the husband, their mothers with mourning for their sons. It was an out-of-body experience. Had we not made this one turn, I would have never known it was even going on. But it was a reminder that it had to have been that way in the 73 section in 73 and 74, and had to have been that way in the 67 section in 67 and 68. What we're bringing into Yom HaZikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut this year is tremendous pain and rawness. The number of people killed. I'm going to guess hundreds of widows in their 20s. In what world are there hundreds of widows in their 20s? Mm-hmm. Many of whom, because they're more religious, have a kid or two. Mm-hmm. So this is going to be a very painful Yom HaZikaron, and what I'm bringing into it is my memory of last year and an awareness that while in the last few months, thank God, many fewer people have fallen, 2024 was also a disastrous year with hundreds of soldiers killed, and this war is not over.
Right, and I remember I spoke to a friend in Israel recently, and she was like, "Every day is Yom HaZikaron. It feels like every day is Yom HaZikaron. Right. There's no. It's not like you're waiting for this moment. It's kind of constant." So I'll ask you the next question then. So we're bringing Yom HaZikaron and this intensity, and there's this transition to Yom Ha'atzmaut. It's something it seems only Israelis could do. It's an unfathomable thing that's very hard to wrap your head around. Talk to me about the transition this year. What do you think it's going to be like? What are you imagining there as well?
Well, we make this transition elsewhere in the Jewish calendar, right? Before Purim, we have the fast of Esther, because Esther tells the people in the Megillah, I'm going to go to see Achashverosh, but I don't know how it's going to go. So everybody should fast for me 3 days, and beseech God to protect me, and so on and so forth. And in recognition of that, we fast the day before Purim. Usually Fast of Esther is just, okay, if you're an observant Jew, the halacha says you got to fast, so you fast. Mm-hmm. It's hard to argue that the Fast of Esther is one of the most meaningful days of the year. Mm-hmm. This year on Purim, the Fast of Esther was a pretty profound fast, mm-hmm. because Esther said basically the fate of the Jewish people is at stake, and the fate of the Jewish people is at stake. Mm-hmm. So I fasted on the Fast of Esther, not saying, oh my God, why am I fasting on the Fast of Esther, but feeling like, yeah, I really need to fast before we're going to go celebrate mm-hmm. Purim. And you go into the celebration of Purim still hungry after the fast, and so it's its own kind of subtle transition. And by the end you're groggering and doing whatever you're doing, but the Fast of Esther loomed much larger this year than it normally does for me. And I think what's going to happen this year is, normally there's these things called, it's a new phenomenon, relatively speaking, 10, 20 years old, called the Tekes Ma'avar, which is what's called a transitional ceremony. So it starts in the afternoon of Yom Hazikaron, and it's the soft music, and it's the guitars, mm-hmm. and people are singing mournful songs. And then as the sun begins to set, they take on a bit of a lighter note, and then it sunsets, and it's now officially Yom Ha'atzmaut, and you go into Ma'ariv, the evening service for that. And then people start singing the songs of Hallel, which are, psalms of praise, and it's clappy and happy, and so it's not like Yom Hazikaron is gone, but you've made a conscious decision to exit Yom Hazikaron, mm-hmm. and you've made a conscious decision now to celebrate, and that worked for all the years that we were in Israel. So if we've been in Israel, 26, 27 years, however long it's been, for the first 24, 25 years, that was how it was, and it was very powerful, and some of those ceremonies were really beautiful and deeply moving. And then you go into Yom Ha'atzmaut, and you do the evening service, if that's what you're into. Then you go to your friend's house, and the barbecues are lit up, and the chicken and the burgers, mm-hmm. and all of that, and the music's playing, mm-hmm. and there's a national ceremony and celebratory ceremony. Last year, nobody watched it, largely because it is, first of all, they recorded it in front of they pre-recorded it. Usually it's live. They didn't do it live last year because they were afraid there'd be protests in the stands, because the prime minister was going to be involved, whatever. So they pre-recorded it, and just knowing that it was pre-recorded felt so fake. So mm-hmm. nobody even watched it. And the dancing was still cute, but nobody was really in the mood. And I think this year, here's what I think is different this year. Last year, it was 6 months, 7 months into the war. Mm-hmm. It's been a horrible 6 or 7 months, mm-hmm. but it was not yet Israel's longest war. Mm-hmm. It's now Israel's longest war. Wow. It's Israel's longest war that is nowhere near over. And I think people are going in feeling exhausted, sad. And if I had to predict this year, it's not that Yom Hazikaron is going to end and Yom Ha'atzmaut is going to start, but the colors are going to blend much more gradually. And there's going to be a lot of Yom Hazikaron mm-hmm. still in Yom Ha'atzmaut. And that is, I think, as it should be, with so many widows and so many bereaved parents. This is not one of those years when you say, well, sorry for your loss, but it's barbecue time. That's just not going to fly. And so I think we're in for a somber Yom Ha'atzmaut. And I think, it's important to say, there's a tremendous amount to celebrate. Just in terms of the last year and a half, we are in much better shape than we were in November 2023. Mm-hmm. Hamas is not gone, but Hamas is radically reduced. Mm-hmm. Hezbollah exists, but it has been mostly destroyed. Mm-hmm. God knows what's going to happen with Syria, but it looks like there's some opportunities for something there. The Abraham Accords have held fast. The deal with Jordan has held fast. So in a lot of ways, Israel is is in a much better place than it was a year ago on Yom Ha'atzmaut. But there's a lot that's not okay, and there's a lot that's not going to be okay anytime soon. So that's how I think the 2 days are going to speak to each other.
Beautiful. And I've heard you use the language before that Israel is a nation of dreams and dilemmas. As we reflect on Yom Hazikaron, Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's birthday, what do you see as the current dreams and dilemmas that are facing us in the coming year?
Well, the dreams are, of course, that our kids who have to go to war should come back healthy in body and soul. Mm-hmm. Our dream is that barbaric evil that now resides on our borders has to be destroyed. not getting into the particulars of what you should do and shouldn't do in Gaza, Lebanon, whatever, that's not for today. But yeah, I mean, you can't live with barbaric terrorists at your borders. You know, for a long time we assumed, yeah, of course they're there. It's the state of nature. And that's why we have an army, and that's why we have a fence. And I think Israelis are saying all of a sudden, no. Why should that be? America doesn't have that. France doesn't have that. Germany doesn't have that. Why do you have to have an enemy sworn on your destruction living on your border? And everybody assumes, well, that's just the way it is in Israel. Well, why? I think this is the first time that Israelis feel there is a dream, not the dream of flowering of the Negev, which is also true and all that, but a dream that we could rewrite the region a little bit. There are plenty of dilemmas, obviously. There's plenty of moral dilemmas, you know, how do you handle Gaza? There are human beings there, whatever one wants to say about, you know, whatever. There are human beings there, and all of that. But I would say it's this year, to me, not so much an issue of dreams and dilemmas, but dreams and deep-seated awarenesses that it's often not easy for us to talk about. And I think this is one of those years when we need, as Israelis, not necessarily on Yom Ha'atzmaut, but in this period of Yom HaShoah, Yom Hazikaron, Yom Ha'atzmaut, we need to be able to have a very honest conversation, first of all, with ourselves, and then second of all, with American Jews, in which the following gets said. And for some of our listeners and viewers, it's going to sound heretical. But as people are getting, oh my God, that's a heretical thing to say, at the same time, you know that this is true, which is, we don't know how this is going to end. We certainly don't know when it's going to end, and we don't know what it's going to look like when it ends. And let's be even more honest. This might not end well. And it might not be Arabs that make it not end well. The Prime Minister himself says we're in an existential war. When the Prime Minister says you're in an existential war, what that means is your existence is in question. Now, he says it's because, you know, we're fighting Hamas and Hezbollah and all of that, but there's also existential things going on internally. And again, this is not the moment at a day like today to talk about this party did that and that party did it. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm just going to say that Israel could become a country in which my children or the children of our friends just simply say, we don't want to raise our kids here. It's too mean, or it's too hard, or, you know, when my boys were little, they would say, am I going to have to go to the army when I turn 18? And we looked at them right in the eye. Certainly we were telling them the truth. And we would say, yes, you're going to go to the army. But by then, there's going to be peace. You'll sit in a computer, you'll do whatever, it's going to be fine. Now, it wasn't fine. One of them became a commando for 8 years. But my daughter has a 2-year-old boy. She's got older daughters, but it's still different for boys and girls. She's got a 2-year-old boy. And I would be very surprised if al mishkava balilot, as we say when she's in bed at night, you know, before she falls asleep, she's not asking herself, do I want this child to have to go to Gaza? And if the answer to that question is no, then she has to ask herself, well, where does he grow up for the next 16 years? I mean, there's even an issue in a different way. You know, a lot of we only have one son who was really in. And, you know, until you've had that, there's just no way to describe. I mean, it's Shabbat afternoon. We're empty nesters. All our kids are married. All our kids have kids. So you're sitting there Shabbat afternoon. We're both sitting in the living room reading, but neither of us are reading, right? And you look at her, I look at her, and I can tell she's not really reading. And she can look at me, and she can tell I'm not really reading. But you can't say, what are you thinking about? Because the answer to that question is something that you cannot utter. So you pretend. You both pretend all Shabbat afternoon that you're reading, because you can't say what you're really thinking about. Now, our son did a chunk of time, but we have friends' kids who are, you know, our kids' friends, did 200 days, 250 days. And they're married, and they've got 2 kids, 3 kids. And at a point, what everybody's hearing now is the wives are saying to their husbands when they get the call up for the 4th round or the 5th round, the wives are saying, you can't go back. I can't do it anymore. I'm lonely, but forget me. I cannot take care of 3 children and have my job and watch your business dissolve and have the kids completely broken because they're old enough to understand that this is bad. So you don't go back. And then the guys all say, I'm going back because my buddies are going back. And I have one friend who's got a kid who's a commander who told me a couple months ago that there were guys when they got back in Gaza, they were sitting around talking one night, and their wives had said to them, if you walk out that door and go to the army, don't come back here. Now, I'm sure they did go back, and I'm sure their wives were very happy to see them back. But when that's the last thing your wife has said to you before you head out, things are really broken. Now, so how do you not get called back? You don't be there. You don't declare that you're leaving. You just get sent by your company to be in Silicon Valley for a couple of years, to be in the Far East for a couple of years, because nobody expects you to fly back to Israel for another 2 or 3 weeks in Gaza. I mean, they do expect you to come to Tel Aviv, and your friends expect you to come from Jerusalem or Hadera or Beersheba or Kiryat Shmona, but they don't expect you to fly back from Phuket for 3 more weeks in Gaza. So that actually is an honorable way of not going back. And a lot of kids are starting to talk about that. So if this becomes a long-term thing, and Israeli doctors start saying, you know what, I can make a lot more money being a doctor in Houston, like a lot more money, because Israeli doctors are not well paid. And Israeli academia is small. I can make professors quicker. I mean, it's just, the country has to feel hopeful and alluring and attractive and filled with promise to negate all the pulls that always pull people away. And the minute that I forget if it's centrifugal or if it's centripetal, but it's the problem of having been out of high school for far too long. But the minute the pull in begins to loosen, because there's the battles over judicial review, there's the reform, because there's polls show a majority of Israelis do not believe that the government is making decisions based on what's best for the country. So if my kid gets called up, again, he's a father of 2, am I sure that he's getting sent back into battle because the people sending him believe this is what Israel needs? Or is it because there's forces in the government that are saying to other people in the government, if you don't do this battle, again, we're pulling out of the coalition. That is not my kid should go into battle. So this is becoming very painful, and I think that this is a Yom Ha'atzmaut where Israelis, some of them will be talking about that, and some of them will be thinking about it but not willing to talk about it. And I think that what we need from American Jews is for those who are rah-rah pro-Israel, and I say that not disparagingly at all, I mean, those are our allies, to understand it's not heretical to say, we don't know how this is going to end. And this could end badly. And if you want to carry the flag down Fifth Avenue or whenever the parades happen, or whatever, it's all great. But the euphoric, Israel's strong, Israel's doing great, whatever, it's just so not matched by what Israelis are feeling, or at least most Israelis that I know are feeling. And by the same token, we're not going to have that conversation with our American Jewish friends who are on the other side, because it almost feels, well, yeah, because you got what's coming to you.
Right.
And we can't go there either. So it's very lonely. It's very lonely when it comes to American Jews, because we're either rah-rah, everything's going to be fine, when maybe it's not fine, or no, it's not going to be fine because look what you did, you occupied for all these years, whatever, and it's not because we occupied. So it's lonely.
And I hear you saying in there's a piece of this which just feels like Israelis are not putting on a show, but really showing up in a certain way when the bus arrives in their town or comes to visit their place. Because like you said, if it's people that are, against Israel, they don't want to admit the pain. And if it's people that are coming with this enthusiasm, they want to match the enthusiasm on the way out.
Right. We want to be in a partnership. And we understand, like, all these people that have come from America, I mean, our house has been home to many of them over the course of the last 15 months, good friends of ours who've come to farm and to pick fruits and to work. I mean, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. It's amazing, and we honor that. And I think it's just totally amazing. And there's people that we know that have come who haven't done that. They just come to Jerusalem or Tel Aviv and stayed in a nice hotel so they could spend money in Israel. And that's also great because these people are totally unemployed. The hotel employees are unemployed. It's all great. So I don't mean in any way to disparage any of that. Either its impact or its intent, which is all wonderful. But we're in different boats because while we're hosting this couple who's staying with us because they came from LA where we used to live because they want to pick whatever, avocados, and I think it was the case there. I went with them, so I think it was avocados. Our kid was north, and their kids weren't, and it's not their fault, but we're in very, very different realities. And I understand that it's hard here in America, and I understand that campuses are a complete horror show, and I understand that there's feelings of anti-Semitic sentiment on the subway, and I get all that. Still not Jabalia. And I think we as a Jewish people are going to need to learn to honor the differences in our situation. To say that we want to be one, not saying we're all in this together, but by saying we're one because we're all in this together in very different ways. And we need to honor those differences for it to be authentic.
Beautiful. I'll ask a couple questions on there. So one, I want to stick with the Army service piece of it just for a second. I don't want to ask this from a political way. I want to ask it more just from how you view the world. So even within Israel, right, you have those whose children are serving on the front lines and those who are not. Do you feel like, are they in the same category as American Jews for you in that respect? In terms
No, they're
of
much worse.
Much worse, okay.
Much worse. No, because I don't expect American Jews. I mean,
Right.
their kids weren't drafted.
Right.
So they went to Penn.
Right.
Instead of the Army. Who wouldn't want to go to Penn rather than a tank? I mean, seriously. No.
I went to Penn, by the way.
Okay, no, so great. I mean, it's seriously, like, it's much better to be in
Sure,
Penn
yeah.
than to be in a tank.
Yeah.
It's more comfortable, no matter how bad the dorm room is.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
promise you, it's more comfortable. And it's a hell of a lot more interesting to be
Right.
at Penn than to be in a tank.
Right.
No, but the issue here is the 20%, 15, 20% of the Israeli population who say we're not serving because it's an army of kofrim. How do you say kofrim? I mean,
What's the word? I can't.
I don't
think
know. The people who are, by definition, their belief system is entirely wrong.
Exactly,
They're whatever. But the army of not real Jews, the army of the bad Jews, the tainted army, the impure army. And we're contributing because we're studying in yeshiva. You know, a friend of mine told me that his kids were coming to Jerusalem during the second Iranian attack, which we knew was coming. Like, it's so hilarious. You go online, they said, the missiles are coming in 8 hours. They're going to be, whatever. It's just so ridiculous. But,
Thank God.
Yes. And this friend of ours, his son has 3 kids, and his wife the son's wife is a doctor, and she was abroad at a conference, a medical conference. So the grandfather said to the father, don't do it yourself. You don't have a safe room. You have to go downstairs to the shelter. We have a safe room in the apartment. Just come to Jerusalem for the event. But the father, it was late. He couldn't figure out where the kids this was. And by the time he got on the road, the sirens went off. He was on the way up to Jerusalem on the hill. So he pulled the car over, and the sirens are coming in. You could hear booms because we're shooting down the missiles. And the bus in front of them had also pulled over and was full of Haredi women, he said. And his kids are all just well-trained. They're elementary school kids. They're lying on the ground with their hands over their heads, and they're not crying. They're just waiting. And he said the women on the Haredi bus are shrieking in terror. And I thought, but I thought your husband studying in yeshiva is going to make us safe. Or do you not really believe that? Of course they don't really believe that. And I think this has gone from being unfair to being outrageous. And that's going to be an issue. I think that it's very possible that the next Israeli election is going to be it's not going to be a coalition of who's right, who's left, who's center, who's this. It's going to be a coalition of those who served and a coalition of those who didn't serve. And I think the Haredi thing is a ticking time bomb. And they're not about to start compromising it, I don't think. And even though on my podcast, whatever, I've interviewed lots of people who are quite optimistic that it's going to be change, I remain to be convinced. I think that it's become, it used to always say, oh, it's not fair. It's an outrage. It's an outrage to see people dancing in circles, men dancing in circles. We are proud, we will never go to the army, we would rather die than go to the army. Part of me wants to say, so then get out. Just get out. Why should I pay for your kids to go to school while you're going to sing while my kids are in the army. And, you hear from so many people. Father finally comes home. He's been gone for 20 days or 200 days. And all he wants is to come home, get a hug from his wife, and kiss his kids. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard this story, mostly from graduates of Shalem College, from the women mostly, who tell me their husbands finally came home. And, he knocks on the door, he's coming to the door, they hear him coming, he already texts them and says, I'm getting out of the bus, whatever. And she meets him at the door, and of course she gives him a huge hug and a big kiss. And then he bends down to his kids, and the kid says, "Ata lo Abba sheli. You're not my father." Because fathers don't leave for 200 days. And my own grandson, he didn't say that because he wasn't verbal, but he wouldn't let my son give him a bath. No, bath time became Ima time. You weren't here. So Ima's giving me a bath, and Ima's putting me to bed. And he would put up a fuss if my son tried to. Now, eventually, my son said, okay, you know what, I am still stronger than you because you're 2 and I'm 30, whatever, and tonight I'm giving you a bath. He waited a few weeks, then he said, okay, now we're drawing the line. But the brokenness, and so, to know that families are going through Ata lo Abba sheli, while these guys are dancing around and singing, we'll never go to the army of the Kofrim, one day we'll figure out how to translate that. It's a sickening outrage. And it has to stop.
Right. Gotcha. I'm thinking of the word apikoros, but that's also not English.
Yeah, that's not English either. I think it's Greek. But
exactly. So again, I want to jump in for a second here because I want to note what I said at the beginning, which is I'm sitting here and my kid's not in the army for sure. I will say it's very important, I think, because especially those in America rarely know of what's called a Hesder Yeshiva, which is kind of a third option here, and that we've shared videos about on JBS of these. And there is a growing group. People think it's like
those are not secular, though.
Right? They think like secular Jews are in the army and religious Jews are not, and they're learning Torah. And there is another group which are people who are combining Torah study alongside protecting the country.
There's also plenty of religious Jews who just go to the army for 3 years or 5 years,
right,
whatever.
Exactly. Great.
I mean, we're talking about a specific segment, which
Right.
is the Haredi segment. No,
Exactly.
a disproportionate number of the guys killed were kippah-wearing people.
Right.
Because there's a tremendous amount of ideological fervor, and their families are very supportive, and their yeshivas encourage them very much to go to the army
Right.
and to be open to sacrifice and so forth. This is not a religious secular thing. This is a Haredi versus the rest of the
And it's not a Torah versus army
100% not.
It's
in fact, if anything,
people.
the Haredi world, I think, is a complete misrepresentation of what Torah is about. Right? When the Jews are coming into the land in the Bible, and Reuven, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh say to Moses, "We like these lands out here outside the land. We think we're going to stay here." And he says to them, "Okay, but first you come in and you fight,
Right.
and then you can live wherever you want." And I mean, they're an abomination to what I think Torah stands for. But it's by no means a religious, non-religious. It's very important that you say that.
Great. I just want to clarify that. And also, similar like any other thing, we don't have a Haredi person in the room to make the case for why it does make sense for them. But even the way you've said it, I think the average person doesn't even think in those terms around, is there value to studying Torah that is in some way helping? And I think you can make the argument, of course.
There's tons of value to studying
There's tons
Torah.
of value to Torah and for prayer, and those things do in some way, I think, certainly shape the cosmos. I think the question is it being done in a way that it's like to avoid army service or something else, or is it being done in a way that seems genuine? Are people taking advantage? And any political agreement, you're going to have people that are going to be taking advantage in some way, for sure. Okay, great. And I appreciate you bringing that in, and that's its own conversation in some deep ways.
Another time.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of dark things. I want to talk about what's giving you hope. I want to talk about your podcast and your Substack and your blog are focused on the soul of Israel. Tell me what excites you about the soul of Israel, what it gives you hope as you think about what's happening in Israel.
A lot gives me hope, and I think it's important in light of the conversation we just had to make that very, very clear. I mean, a tremendous amount gives me hope. And I know that it may not end well, but in my heart of hearts, I actually think it's going to end well. And I believe and I pray to God that it's going to end well. But look, what gives me hope? I mean, so yes, Israel is once again very divided over political issues and judicial reform, which is rearing its head again and all of that. But the outpouring of support across social bounds, the people who, I'm on this WhatsApp list. What they do is when people were, taken away, they were mifunim, they were evacuees. When they want to go back after a year, the house is a disgusting mess. I mean, it's dusty and it might have been attacked. And there are these groups that called Misadrim et Haotef. We clean up the Otef. And you volunteer, and you go down you bring your rubber gloves and your bucket and your mop, and you take somebody's house and they say, these people are coming home next week. This house is a disgusting pigsty. It's going to come in looking like the wall. When they get here, it's going to look like the Waldorf. Wow. It's going to be pristine. I have never been able to go because every time a WhatsApp comes up and I check my calendar, good, I'm good. I sign up, sorry, list is full. I've never been able to get on a list. I mean, there are people doing such extraordinary things. The ways that people are there for each other. We had one car, an old car that we didn't need. So we were about to sell it. We just didn't need it. And my son said, hold on to it. I might need it if I change jobs, whatever. Where that car is now is it's being passed around from Miluim families. The husband takes the car, the family's one car to the border, and then the wife has to take the bus, whatever. So he said, take our car. And when you're done with it, give it to somebody else who needs it. It's a cheap car. It's not a great act of generosity, believe me. And it's a small thing, but people are doing incredible things. I mean, the civilian command centers that emerged at the beginning, which are no longer necessary because the government's kind of gotten its act together a little bit. But there's a tremendous sense of support. There's a tremendous sense of real, genuine love. These guys that were in tanks, the religious guys and then the secular guys and the right-wing guys and the left-wing guys, when they came back into Israel and they popped the top of the tank and they put their fingers up with a V, what did they say? Am Yisrael Chai. This is not about Medinat Yisrael is going to win, or B'yachad and Nenatzeach will win together. That's not what they said, even though those are very common things. They say Am Yisrael Chai. The Jewish people is alive. And I think this has brought back to many people a reminder that we're in Israel, not because we're Israelis, because we're members of the Jewish people who live in Israel. And I think the sense of Jewishness, I don't mean being religious or observant, but just the sense of Jewishness is in the air. Look, I'll tell you something else. I mean, when these Purim, a few weeks ago, there was this thing where kids in Israel, they don't dress up like Haman or Achashverosh or Queen Esther. They don't do that. They dress up very often like superheroes. Batman, Superman, whatever. And this year there was this thing where a girl said to her mother, why would I dress up like a fake superhero when I can dress like a real superhero? And all these Israeli girls, mostly, dressed up like this woman, Emily, who was released from Gaza missing 2 fingers and held up her hand. So these kids took ace bandages or gauze and they wrapped their hands and they did that. They dressed up like hostages, not the part of the hostage which is unbearably painful and horrible. They think she's a hero because she didn't say, oh my God, I'm not going in front of a camera because I'm missing 2 fingers. Whatever. You talk about these Israelis who found deep religious meaning in the most horrific circumstances. So Eli Sharabi talked, and totally not observant man, talked about getting up every morning into hell and saying Shema. And there's a young woman who talked about how she started keeping kosher in Gaza. She refused to eat the meat. She's starving, but she refused to eat the meat. She fasted on Yom Kippur. I mean, the halacha even says you don't have to fast on Yom Kippur if you're in that situation. So, I mean, I think we're finding reservoirs of belief and reservoirs of care and reservoirs of interconnectedness. So that's one thing.
Wait, before you say your second thing, I just want to pause and recognize the full circle, the image you gave of the Haredi women kind of being like, oh my God, we're so scared, and like, do you believe God's going to help you? And you do see these people, in this terrible situation who did turn to God in that way. So there's something there that we're seeing.
The turning to God. And by the way, when these guys get out of Gaza, they don't stay home to recuperate. They get on planes and they go to talk to the president in the Oval Office. They go to the UN. They want to get the rest of the people out.
Right.
Like they're so emaciated, and God knows what happened to them, and they need the therapy that they have not yet gotten. But they said that is going to have to wait because right now I have a job to do. I mean, these are the kinds of inspirational things that are unbelievable. For the first 2 or 3 weekends when they started coming out on Shabbat, my wife and I actually left our TV on, which is probably not a great thing to do. It took a lot of time to figure out how to set it so it wouldn't go off. But we left our TV on because we were just we couldn't imagine not watching these people get out. Now, it destroyed Shabbat, and after a few weeks we said we can't do it anymore. Right. But you'd watch these people come out. You watch Gadi Moses come out, this 80-something-year-old man. And then somebody posted on Facebook, a guy named Hanoch, I'm forgetting the name for a second. He's a very well-known Israeli popular personality, and Hanoch Daum. And he posted this picture of Gadi Moses surrounded by these guys in the masks and the guns and the head covering. And Gadi Tap is holding himself, he's 80, he's emaciated, holding himself, and Hanoch Daum posted that picture, and he said, there is no animal in nature stronger than the Israeli kibbutznik. And that went viral because people looked at whether it was Gadi Moses, Gadi Moses or Eli Sharabi or Yarden Bibas. I mean, these people, and they have been, this notion that you can't all go to the funeral. Some of the funerals were closed, and also you can't all get to the funeral. But they line this. I've done this. You line the streets with flags as the family is. The family's route, and people want to make sure that everywhere along the route there's going to be people holding flags. It's an unbelievable sense of belonging. So this has brought out terrible pain, but there's also tremendous sense of unity. And look, let's also be honest. The army's rebuilding itself. The people that ran the army are now mostly gone. The people that were running the Shin Bet will probably be mostly gone. One can critique whether the process was right or wrong. That's irrelevant for right now. People on the political echelons are still holding on tight, and that's a separate conversation. But the country's rebuilding itself. The army's rebuilding itself. There's unanimous view that the new commander-in-chief is an excellent choice for the job. I hear that from everybody. I don't know him personally. I knew the previous one, who's a wonderful person, but tragic story. So there's a tremendous sense of rebuilding and of hope. And there's now, as I said before, we might get this place to a situation where we're not surrounded by enemies. Look at that. Right. Maybe from the worst day in Israel's history, we will emerge 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years later, who knows, from a situation where we do not have enemies, deeds, and our destruction living. And then we'll go back and we'll rebuild the inside and the kishka. So there's a tremendous amount that gives me hope. And I will be both joyous. I'll be heartbroken on Yom Ha'atzmaut, but I will also be filled with joy and gratitude. Gratitude that I had the privilege of raising my children there, that so far most of my grandchildren are living there, that they're speaking the language of their ancestors with a much better accent than I have, that they feel secure and confident. My 9-year-old granddaughter walks on the street at night to go to this activity. There's nowhere in the United States where you would let your 9-year-old daughter walk, not just around the house, but I mean out. So the crazy thing is, we have to worry that she might have to run into a building because of a missile from Yemen, but nobody's going to hurt her on the street. So it's still an amazing, amazing society. And I look at the shuls that I go to, the people are so unbelievably wonderful, and their kids are in the army. They're the best of what Israel and Zionism is all about. They're working still at this moment to try to help Israeli Arabs and Israeli Palestinians do all kinds of things. And they're left and they're middle, and they're not so much right, but they're left and they're middle and maybe a little right of center. It's a community of extraordinary human beings whose kids are mostly not home, or very often not home. And when they come home, they got a big M16 in shul. But I think this is like the Jewish people reborn. It defends itself when it has to, and when it doesn't have to, it's worshiping together, it's learning together, it's trying to build a better society together. There's a tremendous amount to be hopeful and grateful for. And when I sing Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut, the psalms that we sing in joyous holidays to thanksgiving to God, there's plenty to give thanksgiving for. Plenty. And I think that what we've lost as a modern society is the ability to embrace complexity. This and. I love this person, and this part of our relationship is complex.
That's the challenge of this holiday, right?
That's the challenge of life.
Right.
It's the challenge of human life. Right. And yet we've turned the Israel issue into bumper stickers. I won't mention the organizations, but on the right, Israel, rah, 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 and on the left, occupation born in sin.
Right.
Oh, come on, really?
Yep.
It's complicated, and it was always complicated, and every country on the planet has complicated origins. why do we have to be the only ones who has complicated origins? People say, well, because of that. The people that are American Jews who are busy criticizing Israel because of occupation. This country was not exactly handed over willingly by the people who were here before. So are you leaving this country? No. You're coming to terms with that terrible things were done, and now we have to make amends, whether it was African Americans, whether it was Native Americans, whatever the case may be. Life's complex. And I think Israelis are deep into that complexity. There's obviously people that are not. There's people on the left who are not. There's people on the right who are not. There's the Haredim we talked about. But by and large, I think Israelis have really accepted and even embraced this complexity. And I think that what we should use this Yom Ha'atzmaut to do is for all of us to understand that complexity is not a lack of passion. Right? Most of our marriages, our very best loving marriages, are complex relationships. They are not the relationships that they were on the second and third date. And you wouldn't want them to be. What makes the marriage a lifelong journey worthy of your life is because it makes you a better person. Not by telling you all day long how great you are, but by challenging you to be a better version of yourself through conversations and learning together. And I think that we all want that in our marriage. We don't want a simple marriage. And I don't think we want simple patriotism. I mean, America's a story also, and I think it would apply to America also, but let's leave America aside for now. I don't think Zionism should be simple. I don't think Zionism should be bumper stickers on one side or the other. And I think we could make this Yom Ha'atzmaut the time when we, no matter where we live in the Jewish world, Israel, America, Canada, Australia, South Africa, Europe, I don't care. Let's make this the year where we embrace complexity, not because we have no choice, but because that's the best way to be a human being and a Jew.
Beautiful. Daniel Gordis, thank you so much. It's really been a true pleasure, and I want to echo, you spoke so beautifully about Israel. I just want to hold up briefly that this sentiment of Am Yisrael Chai is definitely felt here in America as well, so heavily, and people are coming out in droves in a way we've never seen before. And may your vision come true. May we see Am Yisrael Chai, and may all the beautiful things you described that are possible come true, and may we sit together for the next Yom Ha'atzmaut and be able to look back on an amazing year for the Jewish people.
Amen to that. Thanks for having me.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת שחים